Naaman, and I believe about chapter 3, verse 7 or so, um, as it relates to this study. So Nahum chapter 3, and we're going to be down around verse 7. So chapter 3 really is the point in time where Naaman the prophet actually brings the woe upon what city? Nineveh, right? And so that's kind of where we really kind of start honing in on the destruction that is to come to them and the various ways that he brings that or pronounces that woe against them there at Nineveh. Now, anytime that somebody who feels like they're pretty strong, or a nation that feels like it's invincible, hears somebody come and begin to pronounce woes or judgments or consequence going to come, what would be the temptation of that nation and its leaders? Yeah, pass it off, right? This can't happen. And so in verses, really roughly about verse 8, he begins a process of describing some other people who thought they were pretty strong too. And that they thought they had the right strongholds, they thought they had the right allegiances, they thought they had the right circumstances set up for them, that this couldn't really happen to them, but it did. And it will serve as a reference then to Nineveh as well. Notice verse 7, it shall come to pass that all they that look upon thee shall flee from thee, and say, Nineveh is laid waste, who will bemoan her? Whence shall I seek comforters for thee? When you begin to win, do people tend to want to be part of what you're doing? Yes. When you begin to lose, what happens? You get away from you. That's why the Cleveland Browns only have 2 real fans. The fact of the matter is that when you begin to go the other direction, people tend to walk away. We call them fair weather fans, right? When things are great, we're right there with you. Things get bad. What's going to happen in Nineveh? As people start to see their decline, people are going to start fleeing, right? They don't want to stay connected to Nineveh. And by Nineveh, we could extrapolate that out to include the whole of Assyria, right? Because that's what we're dealing with. And so people are going to start fleeing. When they see them begin to become weaker and weaker, they're going to start fleeing away from Nineveh and Assyria. And ultimately, the Chaldeans, which are part of that southern part of Babylonia, are going to kind of be the first to kind of take over there. Then the Babylonians under Nabopolassar, and then later Nebuchadnezzar, the full Babylonians kind of come on the scene and take over through his power, including Judah eventually. But the point for Nineveh is simply this. You're going to get weaker, and all those allegiances you think will carry you through, they're going to run. They're not going to stick with you. They're not going to continue to aid you. They're going to flee away from that scene. That happens to nations. It can happen to people. Things are going great. Think of the prodigal son. Things are going great. You got connection. And then as soon as you become weakened, things begin to fall apart around you. And that's what's going to happen to Nineveh. And if they had any questions in their mind whatsoever, that can't happen to them, he begins this process of talking about this other place. He says, Art thou better than populous No, that was situate among the rivers, that had the waters round about it, whose rampart was the sea, and her wall was from the sea. Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was infinite. Put and Luban were thy helpers. Yet was she carried away. Now, I debated whether we go down a big geographical examination of these places. Let's just get the point he's making. The point he's making is there's a place who had the help of Ethiopia, it had the help of Egypt, it had the help of Put, it had the help of Lyman, it had everything going for it, but Nineveh knew that it finally what? Went down. That's the point. Basically, he's telling them, you know of places who had every kind of prosperity and benefit and aid and allegiances helping them, and yet they still fell. So don't think for a moment that you can't. That's the point he's making. He just uses a reference by which they would be able to understand. All of this benefit, was available to them. All of this help was there to them. Yet, verse 10, was she carried away. She went into captivity. Her young children also were dashed in pieces at the top of all the streets, and they cast lots for her honorable men, and all her great men were bound in chains. It's a pretty sad story when you think about what happened to them, but the point is very simple. It happened to them. It's happening to you. And there's no escaping it. You're going to begin to see people in your allegiances and your allies begin one by one to peel away, and the destruction ultimately will come, just like others had experienced. Yeah. And so I guess the point really is simple. There's plenty of evidence of the potential of these kinds of things happening. Any nation of people, if they'll just read history, will recognize that every nation is vulnerable. There is not a single nation that has ever existed on the face of the earth that is not vulnerable. Because nations have come and gone, come and gone, come and gone. And yeah, maybe they have long spans of time, 300, 400 years, 500 years. They may have long spans of time, but nations have come and gone throughout the history of man. All of them have weaknesses. All of them have vulnerability. And all of them are ultimately subject to who? All of them are ultimately subject to God. And so you can't escape if judgment needs to come. And that's the point that they're driving home with these folks. Verse 11, thou also shalt be drunken. Thou shalt be hid. Thou also shalt seek strength because of the enemy. All thy strongholds shall be like fig trees with the first ripe figs. If they be shaken, they shall even fall into the mouth of the eater. Behold, thy people in the midst of thee are women. The gates of thy land shall be set wide open unto thine enemies. The fire shall devour thy bars. You're going to become weak. Ladies, no insult there, but in those days when you talked about war, you didn't go find the great women of the nation. You found the mighty men of that nation, and they were the ones who would go out and fight the battles. But so he uses that analogy. This isn't a band of mighty men that are standing here ready to defend. He describes them as women in this description. And so your land is wide open for your enemies. You can't protect it. The fire shall devour thy bars. Draw thee waters for the seed. Fortify thy strongholds. Go into clay and tread the mortar. Make strong the brickland. Do everything you can to find ways to protect yourself. And you might want to put some provisions ahead. Draw some water and have it ready, because when the siege comes, you're going to want some help and aid. There shall the fire devour thee. The sword shall cut thee off. It shall eat thee up like the cankerworm. Make thyself many as the cankerworm. Make thyself many as the locust. Thou hast multiplied thy merchants above the stars of heaven. The cankerworm spoileth and flieth away. Thy crowned are as the locust, and thy captains as the great grasshoppers which camp in the hedges in the cold day. But when the sun ariseth, they flee away, and their place is not known where they are. You're weak. You're vulnerable. There's no way to ultimately completely protect yourself. You'll be eaten away like the cankerworm does. The locusts come in and destroy and lead. Those who you thought were going to help and aid you, they're going to run away. It's just a big picture of ultimately their vulnerability to the destruction that is to come and the challenges that will arise. Verse 18. Thy shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Thy nobles shall dwell in the dust. Thy people is scattered upon the mountains, and no man gathereth them. There is no healing of thy brood. It is grievous. All that hear the bruit of thee shall clap the hands over thee, for upon whom hath not thy wickedness passed continually. And so, at the end of Nahum's prophecy, the kind of the last straw, if you will, that shows their vulnerability is what were shepherds supposed to be doing? What do they do? Watch, right? The shepherds are supposed to be watching out over the flock, the sheep. Shepherds are supposed to be looking out for what's happening among the people. And he says they're not doing their job. You don't have the watchful. They're asleep, O king of Syria. Your nobles will be like dust. Your people are going to be scattered. You'll not be able to rein them back in as a nation of people. Even if they happen to be able to flee and escape certain destruction that comes, they're not going to be a people again. They'll not be gathered back in. You're not going to heal what? Yeah, the wounds and things that happen, the destruction that comes and the challenges that there's no healing it. This isn't a temporary problem, in other words. This isn't something that's just going to kind of come to the Assyrians and Nineveh and be pretty harmful for a moment in time. You'll get past it, you'll heal up, and you'll be as strong a nation as you were before. You're gone. It's all over. And the destruction is ultimately coming, which is kind of the time period that we'll deal with when we deal with Habakkuk here in just a few minutes. Any thoughts, questions? Yeah. The nation was no longer going to exist as a nation. Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting that both Judd and Nahum had in question. And they're both polar opposites. One's about repentant people, one's about
A people headed for destruction. Yeah, it is interesting that they end that way. I have some of that in my notes. Hang on one second. I think that I can find. It was nigh, because you're talking about. I'll never be able to find it on the page until I. Okay, so this is roughly I'm within a 50, 60 year period. Because I think Nineveh destroyed roughly at 612. This is going on. Yeah. So you're within a fair amount of time, or a short amount of time, really, before ultimately from Nahum's writing till this occurs. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, so jump to Habakkuk then. Let's start. I realize that was looking at these minor prophets as we go through. His is a little different. You're dealing with the time period of Habakkuk from Josiah, which was what kind of king? Josiah was a good king over Judah, right? Anytime you hear the words good king, just go Judah, because Israel didn't have any, right? So anytime you're talking about a good king, just it didn't matter which one, whoever it was, think Judah, because they were the only ones that ever had any good kings. And so Josiah is a good king, but this Habakkuk's writing comes between the death of Josiah and before the Babylonian captivity really begins to kick in strong. And so you're dealing with the kind of the end of that time period before you go into Babylonian captivity. Men like Jeremiah are writing and addressing the people at roughly the same time that Habakkuk is. Habakkuk's written in an interesting way, because Habakkuk really is just kind of inquiring of God, how could you really do this? How is it that you could do the things that you're setting out to do? And then he has kind of a question and answer session, if you will, some back and forth between he and God. And so let's look then at the prophecy itself. He said the burden prophecy, which Habakkuk the prophet did see. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear, even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. So Josiah dies, and the moment Josiah dies, the decline begins, and we're heading towards Babylonian captivity. Habakkuk sees it coming. And what he's seeing is the inroads that the Babylonians are making towards them, and God isn't doing what? He didn't do anything about it. And so as Habakkuk writes, he says, how long shall I cry? How long will I implore you? How long will I make my request before you? Are you not listening to me? For lack of a better description, that's a common feeling, isn't it? When we pray and the result we were aiming for doesn't occur, the temptation is to think, oh, God apparently isn't even paying attention to me. God's not hearing what I'm saying. And Habakkuk feels that way as he beseeches the Lord. How long shall I cry, and yet you're not hearing what I'm asking? I even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Habakkuk, I think, simply means by this that I'm not crying out about trivial matters either, Lord. And sometimes maybe we feel that way as well. Maybe if I was asking for 3 Cadillacs and a bass boat to take out on the river, I could understand why God's not listening to me, right? But I'm talking about violence. I'm talking about evil. I'm talking about things that are causing harm and destruction to your people, Lord, and you don't seem to care. You don't seem to be listening because you haven't saved us from it. Why do thou show me iniquity? Yeah. And you see that, interestingly, amongst those who write in the same time period. Jeremiah, the great lamenting prophet, is living and dealing with the very same situations as Habakkuk is living and experiencing as well. And so here they are lamenting before the Lord that they see the downfall of Judah coming. And God is not rising up to protect and to save them. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I'd have to check my notes again. And Zephaniah, I believe, is also writing in this same time period. So why do you show me iniquity? Why has this lawlessness occurred and caused me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Now, let's also keep in mind that not only do you have the Babylonians causing difficulties and challenges for Judah, but who else is a problem to Judah? It's a trick question, by the way. Judah is a problem to Judah. Their behaviors and iniquities and sins and behaviors. God didn't bring the Babylonians just because He was bored. He doesn't bring them down. He doesn't bring them to bring chastisement and consequence to Judah because he just wanted. He does it because of the condition of Judah. It's Israel was taken into captivity decades prior because of their behaviors and choices. It wasn't that God just wanted to do it. It was because of the way the nation had become. Judah has become filled with iniquity and sin and challenge and difficulty. And on that side, Habakkuk's also wondering, Lord, why are we allowing the people to continue to live this way? We're bringing out violence among ourselves. We're lawlessly living in relationship to one another, spoiling from one another, violence towards one another. There are that raise up strife and contention all around. And so the Babylonians are eventually going to be their major problem, but they're their own problem right now. Before the Babylonian captivity occurs, Judah's got all kinds of sinful practices going on among it. And Habakkuk's wondering, when? At what point, Lord, when will you begin to address these issues and difficulties that we're experiencing? Therefore the law was slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told you. So let me stop for a minute. So verses 1 through 4 is Habakkuk basically declaring the condition of the people. We've got lawlessness, there's violence towards one another, we spoil one another, and that's not in a good way, by the way. That's not spoiling as in giving extra cookies. It's spoiling as in taking what doesn't belong to you from those that you have overpowered. And so Habakkuk's wondering, Lord, when are you seeing this? Do you not see the condition of the people? Do you not see the lawless iniquities that are going on? Are you going to sit back and I've been crying and crying and crying out concerning the condition of the people, and you don't appear to have done anything to try to save us from all this and to answer all this? And then he starts. So Habakkuk has made his appeal before the Lord, 1 through 4. Verse 5, what's God do? All right, here you go. You think I haven't been watching this, Habakkuk? You think I haven't seen these things? You feel like I haven't been responding to the things that are going on? Let me respond. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe. Habakkuk, not only am I going to answer this and deal with these iniquities and sins and violence among my people, but I'm going to do it in a way that's going to blow your mind. You won't believe how I'm going to do this. Though even I tell you about it, though it be told to you, for lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. Habakkuk, you want an answer? Let me give you an answer. I'm sending the Chaldeans in. And you just think for a moment. Now, it's hard for us, right? Because we don't live in that time period. We're not contemporaries. We kind of just have to grasp it historically. But just trust me, when Habakkuk hears that, in his mind, he's like, what? The Chaldeans? Are you kidding me? And he's going to even say that here before we're done. Really? That's the answer? I looked for salvation for thy people. I was looking for aid and help. And you're telling me the answer is to send the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, that'll march through the breadth of the land and possess the dwelling places that are not theirs? They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses also are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. This will not be pleasant. The answer to the challenges of Judah was not for God to protect or save them in some way. The answer for Judah was, I'm going to send the Chaldeans to bring you down. The problem with Judah, is they finally reached a point. Through the prophets, God's been telling them it's coming, right? And once in a while, you'd get a good king to come along. He would at least buy them some time. A good king would come along, do the right things. God would have some mercy towards them, and He spares Judah a little longer than He spared Israel. But it's coming. It's been a long time coming for the violence and the spoiling of one another and the iniquities that they had brought against one another. It has been a long time coming. But it's coming. And it's coming in a pretty severe form. A nation that has horsemen that ride like leopards run. Just imagine that for a moment. As they would come with this military power and just overwhelm nations as they would come. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. The fierceness of them is like the evening wolves. This is a powerful, powerful nation. And when they come, they're not coming to see whether or not you want to make a treaty or find a peaceful resolution. They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. They shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. When they come, they will come with the mighty power of the greatest military might that they could ever imagine. And when they come into that place, that's not going to be coming in a peaceful manner. They're going to come with violence, and they're not going to care whether the kings come and try to make peace or try to have some kind of reconciliation, even surrender maybe in some senses. They will scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. Any stronghold where people probably, and think about that, if you live out in the villages and the kind of on the outskirts of a major city, what are you going to do when you see the Chaldeans coming? You're going to run to the city, right? You're going to run to the strongholds, but the Chaldeans are just going to deride the stronghold. They'll scoff at the idea that there's some place that you can find protection, that you can find a walled city that will be able to aid and help and protect you during these things. Nothing's going to help. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. Which is ultimately what happens with the Chaldeans as they become proud over the empowerment. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment. And Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. So verses 1 through 4, I've been crying about this, Lord. I've been crying about this, Lord. And you've done nothing. You've done nothing to help us. And are you listening? And do you hear what we're saying? And God comes back. Yeah, I've heard. And I do have an answer. They're the Chaldeans, and they're coming. And when they come, they're going to bring violence and difficulty and challenge upon you. And they're even going to take credit for it. The Lord's even going to take some challenge here in some senses. Because Jehovah God is the God of Judah, right? And if Judah falls, the nations round about assume that their God fell. And so even the Lord's going to take a black eye, if you will, in all of this, at least temporarily. And so Habakkuk's reaction, Lord, you're the everlasting God. How could you let a nation of people, number one, come in and wreak such havoc and violence against your own people? And then number two, you're going to let them take credit for it, and not just personal credit, you're going to let them attribute it to their own gods? How could you're the everlasting Lord? You're the everlasting God. How could that ever happen? Oh, Lord my God, mine Holy One, we shall not die. How can this be? Thou hast ordained them for judgment, and Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. Up till this point, God would do that, right? He would bring some kind of judgment and chastisement. Hopefully they'd learn something. Maybe they'd spin around. And you had that with Judah, right? A good king would come. He would do some good things, get them on the right track. Then what would ultimately almost always happen with the next king? The next king would come along and he didn't learn anything. They'd go back. And a new chastisement would come. And a judgment would come. So that's been the pattern. So Habakkuk's like, wait a minute. Up until now, what you've done is just correct. We got offline and out of kilter here. You've been just kind of bringing a judgment that kind of got us back on track. We're going to die? You can't let us die. And thou art of purer eyes than to behold the evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? When Habakkuk looks at Judah and the Chaldeans or the Babylonians, what does he think in terms of their righteousness? Yeah. Well, at least comparatively speaking, right? He knows that Judah's got violence and iniquity and sin and problems. He knows Judah's got that going on amongst the people. But in his mind, he's still thinking, well, we're still better than them. We've still got more righteousness going on among us than they do. How could you use them? You can't even look at iniquity. Habakkuk he's every emotion you could think about. He's frustrated that God hasn't been listening, and now that he does respond, this is the answer. He's confused because in his mind, he understands God to not want anything to do with iniquity. And yet he's going to use this sinful, violent nation in order to bring judgment. It's this. You can just kind of put yourself in Habakkuk's shoes for a minute and just think about all the thought processes that are going through his mind as he's made his petition before God, and this is the answer that he gets in return. You're too pure for this, Lord. Your eyes are too pure to sit back and watch this kind of iniquity happen. Yeah, once you get past Josiah. Yeah. And some of the patience God has had has been because of prior actions too, of others. And so the judgment's coming through a violent source. And Habakkuk is pretty challenged by all of this. And so he continues to ask God these questions. Are you going to really use the wicked to devour your people who are more righteous than they? Make us men as the fishes of sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them? They that take up all of them with the angle, they catch them in their net and gather them in their drag, therefore they rejoice and are glad. Is that really what you envision for your people, Lord? To let this violent nation come in here with like their fish nets and just and drag it through the nation and just capture whomever they can. Therefore they sacrifice unto their net and burn incense into their drag, because by them their portion is fat and their meat plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net and not spare continually to slay the nations? Lord, all they're going to do is come in here with a big net, and once they get the net full of people, they'll just destroy them, empty the net, and then go back out and drag some more. They are unmerciful, they're unkind, they're violent, they bring utter destruction. The difficulties that they create when they come in to battle against another nation are fierce. Is this really what you're choosing for us? Can the purity of your eyes really sit back and watch that kind of destruction come against your people? And so the first question that Habakkuk asked was, aren't you going to do something about the sins of your people? What's basically the second question then? Well, sort of, but it really, so aren't you going to judge? And then, are you really going to judge that way? I asked you to bring judgment. I wanted you to come and kind of address these iniquities among the people, but not that way. Yeah. And Habakkuk really wasn't calling for God to bring the nation to destruction. He just wanted some judgment that would allow for repentance, hopefully, and a rejuvenation of them as a nation. That's not the answer that he got from God. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. How much time and space and things necessary. So He asked his first question, he got a quick response. He didn't like it. When he didn't like the idea that the answer was coming by the hands of the Chaldeans, he asked another series of questions. How can a pure God, how can a righteous God, how can a God who's been wonderful and good and gracious towards His people for all this time, how could He do this? How could you let the how could you even think about using such a violent nation to come against us? They're not going to come and correct us. They're going to come and destroy us. And so then, whoops, sorry about that. Look quickly, just for a second, at chapter 2. We won't get very far at all. But here's what I love about Habakkuk. So, initially you might think in your mind, well, this is maybe it's a little presumptuous for Habakkuk to be talking this way. I mean, after all, he's having a discussion with God. It reminds you a little bit of whom? In terms of God, you're not getting this right, and I could probably do this better. Job, isn't that kind of what Job said? Isn't that kind of when in the latter part of the book of Job, when he begins to have those discussions with God, he can't quite figure it out? Habakkuk and Job got a similar tone to them, because not just from the idea of willingness to ask some questions, but there's also this level. Now, notice what Habakkuk says. Verse 1 of chapter 2. I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when, what? When I am corrected or reproved. So Habakkuk asked some pretty hard questions. I can't believe you're going to do that, Lord. I just can't believe that you would let, number one, the people get so wicked, and number two, your answer is to bring these wicked Chaldeans in here for the answer. And then he says, but I'm going to sit back now. I've said enough. I've said enough. Side point for a second. Isn't it great when we figure that out on our own? When we figure out we've said enough before somebody else has to tell us we've said enough? That's right. It's similar, right, to what Job said as well. And so Habakkuk says, I've said my concerns before the Lord. I'm going to stand on the watch now and wait for His response. And Habakkuk fully expects to be what? Last word of the verse. Reproved. He's not looking for vindication. He fully expects to be reproved. That's what I want us to see in that, and we'll talk a little more about this, Lord willing, on Wednesday. That is the disposition. Can we ask God questions concerning what's going on in our lives and situations, even among a nation? It's not wrong to ask questions. Yeah. Right. And so long as we ask those questions with that understanding, that God is the one who's in control and He does understand the situations better than ourselves. And then when we have these challenging questions and we offer them, but we step back then and we say, you know what, but I fully expect to be reproved. I expect that my thoughts and what I think was best in this circumstance, I'm ready to be corrected, because the Lord's responses are far superior to mine. I love Habakkuk's disposition and attitude. He just stands ready to be corrected of whatever it is that God wants him to appreciate. And God does that in verse 2. He begins to answer him when he says, the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. Habakkuk, I've told you what's coming, and I need you to write it down. Don't question it. Write it down and let them know what's on the horizon. We'll talk more about that, Lord willing, on Wednesday.